Now, we will talk about the play Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare. This is a well-knit plot summarized into a small play by William Shakespeare, where he talks about love and comedy all together. This is a love story where two people share mutual love and hatred for each other, that's Bentrick and Burnaway. Let's have a look at the summary. Act 1. A messenger arrives in Messina and informs Leonato, the governor, that Don Pedro will be coming to the town with his army. Leonato asks how the war campaign went and learns that no men of high rank lost their lives, and that a man named Claudia received many of honors of his valor in battle. Beatrice, the niece of Leonato, asks the messenger if Benedict of Padua has returned from the wars as well. The messenger informs her that he is with Don Pedro's army and has befriended Claudia. Beatrice sarcastically compares Benedict to a disease that men catch and says a great deal of negative things about Benedict. Now, in the first act of the play, right in the beginning, we can see a level of hatred which Beatrice holds for Benedict, and this is clearly visible through her words. Moving on, Don Pedro arrives accompanied by Claudia, Benedict, Balthasar and Don John, his bastard brother. He greets Leonato and speaks with him while Beatrice and Benedict converse together. Beatrice is caustic and tells Benedict it is a good thing that he does not love any of the ladies, because when they would have to put up with him far more than they do now, Benedict is unable to compete with her wit, and they finally break off conversation. Now here, people are talking about Benedict and Beatrix, and they tend to say that Benedict is very incompetent in terms of the rest of the females because he is not able to match the level of intellect and wit those females hold. Don Pedro announces to his men that Leonato has generously allowed them to stay for a month. Leonato turns to Don John and tells him he is glad that Don John and Don Pedro are reconciled. Don John says, "I am not a man of many words, but I thank you." Everyone leaves except Claudia and Benedict. Now at the end of the scene, everyone leaves the scenario, but Benedict and Claudia are remained behind, and they are happy to understand that Don John and Don Pedro are back in terms again. Claudia turns to Benedict and asks him, "Didst thou note the daughter of Signor Leonato?" Benedict tells him, "I noted her not, but I looked on her," and makes fun of Hero's complexion and height. Claudia tells him he is serious about her and wants to know what Benedict really thinks. Don Pedro enters and asks Benedict to tell him what is going on. Benedict reveals that Claudia is in love with Hero. Now, there is an expression of love here, and people are trying to explain each other that somebody has fallen in love for somebody, right? Moving on, Don Pedro agrees that Hero would be a good match for Claudia. He then turns to Benedict and asks him why he mocks Claudia. Benedict tells him he wishes to remain a bachelor for the rest of his life and that he will never flush with love for a woman. Don Pedro tells him that he will see Benedict in love for he dies. He then sends Benedict away to Leonata. Now here, we need to understand that Don Pedro agrees that Hero would be a good match for Claudia, but then Claudia has to face the situation of a no in terms of her love, because Benedict asks him that Don Pedro wants to live a life of bachelor all his life, and he understands this fact that he will not be able to love a woman. Moving on, Claudia asks Don Pedro if Leonato has any sons and learns that Hero alone is his heir. Don Pedro promises to speak with Leonato about arranging a match between them, but Claudia is afraid to speak to Hero and tell her he loves her. Don Pedro informs him that there will be a masked ball that night and that he will pretend to be Claudia and woo Hero in Claudia's name. Moving on to Act 1, Scene 2. Leonardo and Antonio, his elder brother, meet and discuss Leonardo's guests for the ball that was supposed to take place that night. Antonio informs Leonardo that a servant of his overheard Don Pedro and Claudia speaking together in his speech occurred. The man reported that Don Pedro told Claudia he loved Hero and would acknowledge it that night at the dance, intending to go to Leonardo if he found Hero consenting. Leonardo is excited but this news, but tells Antonio to keep it a secret until Don Pedro actually comes to him. He only decides to tell Hero so that she may prepare an answer. Now, Don Pedro also decides to come up with his proposal to Hero. Now, he wants Antonio to keep it a secret until he actually goes and confesses it. Moving on. Act 1, Scene 3. Conrad approaches Don John and asks him why is he so sad looking. Don John tells him that there is not reason, merely that he prefers to be the way he is. When Conrad points out that since Don John only recently was reconciled with Don Pedro, he should try to seem happy. Don John exclaims, I had rather be a canker in a hedge than a rose in his grace. Now here, this conversation is pulled up between Conrad and Don John, where he asks him why is he looking sad, and he asks him that now that you guys are back in terms with Don John and Don Pedro, he's talking about, you should be more happy. In this due course, Don John explains, I'd rather be a canker in his hedge than grace him with a rose. Moving on, Borachio, another friend of Don John, arrives and informs Don John that he has overheard his brother and Claudia plotting a marriage with Hero. Now here comes the main plot of the marriage, where Don John's friend Borachio has come up and informed him that Claudia is plotting a marriage with Hero. He hid behind a wall hanging and listened to them discuss how Don Pedro would woo Hero and then give her to Claudia. Don John tells them to come with him so that he can figure out a way to thwart Claudia.